My grandmother died and left me her house, the only family who ever loved me. Days later, I woke up to a broken window and a note. This house isn't yours. Get out before it's too late. The next morning, my entitled parents and golden child brother showed up worried, then demanded I hand over the keys. They kicked me out at 18. Now they want my inheritance. But Grandma left me more than just a house. She left me clues, and this fight is just getting started. The splintered wood of the window frame was the first thing I saw. A jagged tear in the pre-dawn Oregon gloom. The Pacific's salty tang unusually sharp. Then, cold dread, a familiar companion, wrapped its icy tendrils around my gut. I'd only been in Grandma June's coastal cottage for 3 days, naively believing peace attainable. Her lavender sachet scent had barely become comforting, and already violence, or its threat, had visited. My heart hammered as I scanned the living room. Nothing obviously stolen, just disturbed. A subtle violation making my skin crawl. Then, the note on the kitchen table, weighted by a chipped teacup. This house isn't yours. Get out before it's too late. No signature, just a raw, ugly threat. The old floorboards creaked as I moved cautiously, every shadow a menace. This wasn't random vandalism. This felt personal, a message. My stomach tightened. Who knew I was here, besides Grandma June's lawyer? The answer was obvious and sickening. My mind, reeling from Grandma's passing a week prior, flashed to another eviction, another note. 18, high school diploma fresh, walking into a stripped bare house. My parents, David and Susan Henderson, architects of my childhood misery, and my golden boy brother, Ethan, had vanished. 2 states away, the landlord eventually said, after 3 days of me in that empty, terrifying house, eating stale cereal. Their parting gift to their lazy, ungrateful son? A post-it. Figure it out, Alex. Time to stand on your own 2 feet. No goodbye, no explanation, just a casual severing. Ethan, the chosen one, went with them. His bright future, college, car, their adoration, all packed. Me? Excess baggage, finally ditched. Grandma June, bless her soul, was my only refuge, sending what little money she could, her letters a lifeline in a sea of indifference. She'd always whispered during my childhood visits, her eyes sad, "Be careful of family, Alex. Sometimes blood runs thicker with greed than love. This old house, it might bring peace or trouble. Remember." She'd also given me a small, tarnished silver locket she always wore, pressing it into my palm. "Keep this close, Alex. It might bring comfort or show you a way." At the time, a sentimental gesture. Now her words and that locket in my duffel echoed with chilling prophecy in her violated home. The timing of this break-in, this threat, was too goddamn convenient. As if summoned by the fear in Grandma's kitchen, my phone charging on the counter rang an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, dread washing over me, before answering, "Yeah?" The saccharine voice was instantly recognizable. "Alex, darling, it's Mom." Susan. Her voice, usually for public maternal displays or private guilt trips, was now at an 11 on fake concern. "Oh, Alex, we heard about the break-in at June's house. We were so worried. Are you all right? We're actually not too far away visiting old friends. We thought we'd drive over just to check on you. Not too far away? Not for my graduation, not for any birthday in 10 years. 10 brutal years of me busting my ass, building a life odd jobs, then my food truck, Alex's gourmet grinds, from the ashes they'd left. But now, Grandma gone, her valuable coastal house mine, suddenly they were not too far away. The lie was blatant, insulting. My hand tightened on the phone. The grapevine was probably their own damn reconnaissance. An hour later, suggesting they'd been lurking nearby, their late model sedan pulled up. Out piled the Hendersons, Susan, dabbing perfectly dry eyes, David, a mask of paternal concern, his shifty eyes casing the joint, Ethan, smug and impeccable, and his wife, Brittany, personality as sharp as her stilettos, already scanning the cottage with disdain. "Oh, Alex, my poor boy." Mom launched herself at me, a flurry of theatrical sobs and cloying perfume. "This neighborhood clearly isn't safe. Living all alone in this rustic place. We were beside ourselves." Dad nodded gravely, hand on Ethan's shoulder, pointedly excluding me. "Your mother's right, son. No place for a single man. Especially now." His gaze flickered to the splintered window frame, a smug accusation. Ethan, the entitled prince, cut to the chase, Brittany smirking. "Look, Alex, be real. This house, it's quaint, but you don't need it. You've got your food truck, used to roughing it. Brittany and I," he gestured vaguely towards Brittany's designer-clad flat stomach, "we're expecting again. Twins. Can you believe it? A blatant lie, designed for guilt. We desperately need space. A yard for the kids. Ethan Jr., Emily, plus 2 more. This place, with professional renovation, could be perfect for us." Mom chimed in, voice dripping false sweetness. "Yes, darling, what June would have wanted. Family close, great grandkids safe. You can visit, and you wouldn't have to worry about upkeep or intruders." The sheer audacity stole my breath. This wasn't subtle. The break-in, their coincidental arrival, this demand, a coordinated assault. "So, let me get this straight," I said, voice dangerously calm, a volcano of rage, grief, and a decade's resentment threatening to erupt. "You kicked me out at 18, post-it note. No space for a lazy freeloader. 10 miserable years, not a goddamn word. Grandma June, the only one who gave a damn, leaves me her house, my only real home. And now, not a week after her funeral, you show up, after a convenient break-in, and demand I hand it to Ethan and his imaginary twin-expecting wife? Is that about right? Am I missing any insulting details?" My father's mask slipped, revealing hard-edged impatience. Don't take that disrespectful tone, Alex. We're family, trying to find a practical solution. Ethan has responsibilities. He needs this house more. It's practical. Practical? I nearly choked. For whom, Dad? Ethan, who never worked for anything because you two handed him everything? Or practical for you so you don't deal with his expanding brood under your roof anymore? Brittany gasped theatrically. How dare you? Ethan works very hard. Doing what, Brittany? I shot back, patience snapping. Managing his allowance? Or that cushy consulting job with Dad's golf buddy, Mr. Abernathy, who keeps investing in Ethan's failing ideas. Ethan's face flushed a mottled red. You have no idea what you're talking about, you pathetic, grease-stained food truck cook, he snarled. Enough, Mom shrieked, voice sharp, shrewish, like in my childhood lectures where I was always wrong. Alex, you're being deliberately difficult, incredibly selfish. A reasonable request. We're helping you, taking this considerable burden off your inexperienced hands. A burden? I laughed, harsh and bitter, Grandma's lavender scent now a mockery. This house is the only decent, unconditional, loving thing anyone in this damn family ever gave me. A gift from the only person who ever saw me as more than a disappointment. And you delusionally think I'll let you waltz in and take it for King Ethan? You're all certifiably insane. Dad stepped forward, eyes narrowed, voice a menacing growl. Choose your next words carefully, Alex. You wouldn't want to make things unnecessarily difficult. There are things about this house, June's affairs, you don't understand. Things that could become extremely troublesome if you're uncooperative. A veiled threat, blatant as the note, just like Grandma's warning, the chill in my gut intensified. As they reluctantly piled back into their sedan, faces tight with resentment, Mom delivered her ultimatum. 1 week to reconsider, Alex, she said, voice cold as flint. 1 week to do the right thing for your brother, your family. Don't make us take further steps. Further steps. The words hung like toxic fog. I watched them drive away, their expensive car's quiet purr, a final insult, cold anger, and deep unease tightening my chest. After they left, I searched the cottage again, a focused dread replacing grief. The break-in was too clean, too purposeful. Not for valuables. They'd been looking for something specific. My eyes fell on Grandma June's old roll-top desk. That one small upper drawer, unnoticed before, was slightly ajar. The wood around its tiny brass lock splintered, as if pried open in a hurry. My heart pounded. What had they been looking for, and what further steps were they planning? Grandma June's house by the sea, once a symbol of peace and love, now felt like the contested, dangerous center of a gathering storm. The week that followed my family's ominous visit and their parting ultimatum was a masterclass in psychological warfare. A relentless siege designed to wear me down until I capitulated. My phone became a conduit for their escalating campaign of pressure and thinly veiled threats, a constant, unwelcome intrusion into the fragile peace I was trying to cultivate in Grandma June's home. Mom, Susan, would call daily, sometimes multiple times, her voice a bizarre, unsettling oscillation between tearful, whimpering pleas about family unity and the supreme importance of forgiveness and sharp, guilt-inducing lectures on my ingrained selfishness and appalling lack of gratitude for all the sacrifices they'd supposedly made for me over the years, sacrifices I had absolutely no memory of, only a long, bitter, internal tally of neglects, dismissals, and outright cruelties. Dad, David, preferred a more menacingly calm, almost corporate approach to his particular brand of intimidation. His occasional texts were filled with vague, lawyerly-sounding warnings about unforeseen complications that could arise with Grandma June's estate, subtle hints that the probate process could become extraordinarily difficult and unnecessarily expensive for me if I wasn't prepared to be reasonable, and repeated suggestions about how it would be so much simpler, so much cleaner for everyone involved if I just cooperated and saw the bigger familial picture. Ethan, predictably, was the blunt instrument in their orchestra of manipulation, his contributions devoid of any pretense or subtlety. His messages, when he bothered to send them directly instead of having Mommy or Daddy act as his mouthpiece, were a crude barrage of entitled demands, childish insults, and accusations that I was jealously hoarding a house I didn't deserve, while his poor, innocent, rapidly expanding family suffered in their supposedly cramped, though, as I recalled from a Christmas visit years ago, perfectly adequate and rather upscale suburban tract home. Brittany, his charming wife, ever the social media warrior, took her campaign to the public forum of Instagram and Facebook, posting a series of cryptic, passive-aggressive statuses about heartless, unfeeling relatives who turn their backs on blood, and greedy wolves in sheep's clothing who prey on vulnerable, struggling young families. Clearly aimed at me and cleverly designed to drum up sympathy from their curated circle of equally superficial friends, a tactic I was sure was meant to further isolate me and preemptively poison any well of local support I might find in Grandma June's tight-knit coastal town. The break-in at Grandma's house, the one that had so conveniently preceded their dramatic arrival, was never mentioned again by any of them, as if it had been a figment of my overactive imagination, a bad dream I'd conjured up out of grief. Yet, the memory of that splintered window frame, the ugly, threatening note on the kitchen table, and the violated sanctity of Grandma's old roll-top desk, specifically that one obviously forced, splintered drawer, kept a cold, hard knot of anxiety cinched tight and unyielding in my gut. They weren't just after the house as a piece of desirable coastal real estate, they were after something in the house, or something connected to it, something that splintered drawer represented something they believed was still hidden there, something perhaps more valuable than the property itself. The gnawing question of what that could be became a constant, unwelcome hum in the back of my mind. My food truck business, Alex's gourmet grinds, my sole source of income, my pride, the one damn thing in my entire life I'd built entirely on my own through sheer grit, with my own sweat and blood, and a couple of maxed out high-interest credit cards in the early days, also started experiencing a string of unfortunate coincidences that felt anything but coincidental. A vital compressor in my prep kitchen's main refrigerator, a brand new unit I just invested in, would mysteriously malfunction right before a massive, lucrative catering gig I'd landed for a local arts festival, forcing me to scramble like a madman, rent emergency cold storage at exorbitant rates, and still lose nearly half my perishable, expensive stock. A bulk order of fresh, locally sourced organic produce, the kind I prided myself on using and which formed the backbone of my menu's reputation, would arrive inexplicably spoiled, smelling vaguely but distinctly of some kind of chemical cleaning agent, rendering it unusable. Anonymous, scathing, one-star online reviews, clearly fabricated by someone with a vendetta and filled with ludicrous, easily disproven accusations. Found a cockroach in my taco. Chef was visibly intoxicated and slurring his words, gave me food poisoning that lasted for days, avoid at all costs. Would suddenly appear on every platform imaginable, from Yelp to Google reviews, attacking everything from my food quality and portion sizes to my personal hygiene and the cleanliness of my meticulously maintained truck. I couldn't prove it was them, not yet, not with concrete, irrefutable evidence a court of law would accept. But the timing was too precise, the malice too familiar, too targeted, too much in line with their escalating desperation. They were trying to squeeze me from all sides, to undermine my financial stability, to tarnish my hard-earned reputation, to make my life so utterly unbearable, so filled with stress and uncertainty, that handing over Grandma June's little coastal sanctuary, my only inheritance, my only link to a loving past, would seem like the only viable path to peace, the only way to make them stop. But I knew, with a certainty bone deep and hard-won from a lifetime of their particular brand of familial love, that peace with them was an illusion, a dangerous, seductive mirage. Their peace always came at my expense. Their family unity was just another carefully chosen term for my complete and utter soul-crushing capitulation. I wasn't gonna roll over and play dead. Not this time. Not for Grandma June's house. She had believed in me when no one else on this goddamn planet had left me this one tangible, precious piece of her unwavering, unconditional love, and I'd be damned if I'd let those vultures snatch it away with their lies, their manipulations, and their pathetic, transparent threats. My first call, after a long, sleepless night, spent staring at the unfamiliar patterns on Grandma's bedroom ceiling and replaying their smug, entitled faces, their greedy, grasping words in my mind, was to Mr. Peterson. He was a retired police detective, a man built like an old, weathered oak tree, gruff and no-nonsense on the surface, but with a keen, intelligent eye for bullshit and an even keener, more nuanced understanding of the subtle, often dark, and frequently intertwined undercurrents of their small, seemingly tranquil coastal town. He had been Grandma June's neighbor and closest, most trusted friend for over 30 years, a constant, steady presence in her life, especially after my grandfather passed. He'd always been genuinely kind to me during my childhood summer visits, a gruff but welcome, grounding respite from the constant barrage of criticism and casual, unthinking cruelty that characterized my own parents' interactions with me. He listened to my story patiently, his weathered face, etched with the lines of 1,000 solved cases and 1,000 seen sorrows, growing grimmer, his jaw tightening with each detail. I recounted about the break-in, the note, and my family's subsequent outrageous demands. Your grandmother, Alex, he said when I'd finally finished, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that nevertheless carried the unmistakable weight of quiet authority, was a sharp woman, one of the sharpest, most resilient I've ever known. She loved you dearly, son, more than words can truly express, but she wasn't naive, not by a long shot, especially when it came to your parents and Ethan. She mentioned to me a few times in her later years, particularly after your grandfather passed and she was more alone, that she was concerned about certain, shall we say, pressures from your parents, David and Susan, specifically regarding her finances. She never went into explicit specifics, Alex. June, she kept her family business private, as was her way even with me. But she hinted more than once that they were relentlessly trying to get her to invest in some of Ethan's so-called brilliant business ventures. Ventures that, from what little she did let slip with a sigh and a roll of her eyes, always seemed to go belly up rather spectacularly, leaving your folks holding the bag and, I strongly suspect, looking for a new source of funds, a new angel investor, to bail out their perpetually irresponsible golden boy yet again. His words, delivered in that calm, matter-of-fact tone, confirmed my growing, sickening suspicion. That splintered drawer on Grandma's old roll-top desk, the strange, out-of-place, official-looking financial papers I'd found tucked away in an old recipe box after their visit. They were all crucial pieces of a larger, uglier, and increasingly complicated, dangerous puzzle. It wasn't just about the house. It was about what the house or Grandma's estate might contain or represent to them beyond its simple market value. My next call. Acting on Ava's earlier, insistent recommendation. Ava was a fiercely loyal friend I'd made during my early, struggling food truck days in LA. A sharp-witted event planner who knew everyone and had a knack for cutting through bureaucratic red tape was to a young, hungry, and reportedly tenacious lawyer she knew who had recently relocated her practice to Portland, a woman named Sarah Chen. Sarah, according to Ava, specialized in contentious estate disputes and had rapidly built a formidable reputation for being an absolute take-no-prisoners bulldog in the courtroom. Someone who didn't back down from bullies or tolerate procedural nonsense from opposing counsel. After hearing my entire story over a secure video call, including the deeply unsettling details of the initial break-in, the subsequent family ambush at Grandma's house, their outrageous demands, the ongoing campaign of harassment, and my strong suspicions about a potentially fraudulent or coerced updated will they might try to produce, Sarah was more than just intrigued. She was visibly, professionally incensed. The timing of their demand, Alex, coupled with the initial suspicious break-in and the subsequent clear pattern of escalating harassment, is highly indicative of bad faith, to say the very least, she said, her voice crisp, professional, and carrying an undercurrent of steely, reassuring resolve that I found immensely comforting in my current state of besieged anxiety. If your grandmother's original, properly executed will, the one you were clearly aware of, unequivocally states you as the sole beneficiary of the house, then your family, legally speaking, has a very, very weak standing. Their only viable recourse would be to produce a more recent, legally sound codicil amending the original will, or an entirely new, validly executed will that supersedes it. And even then, she continued, a sharp, intelligent glint in her eye that I was profoundly glad was on my side and not theirs. If there's any credible evidence, and it certainly sounds like there might be, that your grandmother was under duress, lacked the requisite mental capacity, or was subjected to undue influence when such a subsequent document was purportedly signed, it can be, and believe me, will be, vigorously contested and likely overturned in probate court. Our first step is to find out exactly what they think they have on you, or more accurately, on the estate, and why they are so damn desperate, so willing to employ these kinds of underhanded tactics for that specific house. She suggested we immediately file a caveat with the probate court to prevent any surprise filings of a new will without our knowledge, and to start meticulously documenting every instance of harassment, no matter how small it seemed. The further steps my mother had so ominously threatened during her parting ultimatum became chillingly clearer a few days later when a smarmy, overtanned, local lawyer I didn't recognize, a Mr. Davies, contacted me via a curt, official-looking registered mail, his letterhead proclaiming him a specialist in family law and estate planning. He was, the letter pompously stated, acting on behalf of the concerned Henderson family. He informed me, in a tone dripping with oleaginous, utterly false sympathy that practically oozed off the expensive paper, that an updated and legally binding addendum to Grandma June's last will and testament had recently, and quite fortuitously, been discovered amongst her most personal and treasured effects. This miraculous, conveniently appearing addendum, he claimed with what I could only imagine was a perfectly straight, lying face, stipulated that while the coastal cottage was indeed bequeathed to me, Alex Henderson, it was with the express understanding and legally enforceable condition that said property be made available for the immediate and indefinite use of any direct family member who was found to be in dire or pressing need of suitable and secure housing, a clause so breathtakingly vague and open to ludicrously broad interpretation. It was clearly, unequivocally, and laughably designed to give Ethan and his ever-expanding brood carte blanche to squat in Grandma's house indefinitely, effectively dispossessing me through a backdoor legal maneuver. Davies in his letter magnanimously suggested a friendly, informal family meeting at his well-appointed local offices to discuss the smoothest, most dignified, and most amicable way to honor dear June's unequivocal final wishes, which I knew, with a certainty that settled like a cold, hard stone in my gut, was just polite, obfuscating, the lawyerly code for how quickly can you sign these legally dubious papers and hand over the goddamn keys to Ethan without making an embarrassing public fuss and costing us all a fortune in legal fees. Sarah Chen, when I immediately scanned and forwarded her the letter, practically snorted with derision. She immediately identified it as a poorly veiled, amateurish, and frankly insulting legal trap. They're trying to get you to implicitly acknowledge the existence and potential validity of this fabricated addendum by even agreeing to discuss its terms with their lawyer Alex, she warned, her voice sharp with professional disapproval. Or, even better from their perspective, to get you to agree to some kind of informal, unrecorded, shared living arrangement, something they can later twist, misrepresent, and use against you as proof of your prior agreement in probate court when they try to enforce this sham document. Do not, under any circumstances, meet with them or this Davies character without me physically present beside you. And do not sign anything from them. Not a damn thing. Not even a goddamn happy birthday card from them right now, if your birthday were tomorrow. Her advice was firm, and I intended to follow it to the letter. The pressure, however, was relentless, a multi-pronged, suffocating assault on my peace of mind, my business, and my resolve. Brittany, Ethan's charming and ever-scheming spouse, somehow managed to get hold of my personal cell number, a number I guarded closely and rarely gave out to anyone outside my immediate circle of trusted friends and business contacts, which made me wonder who among my very small circle could have betrayed that trust. She then proceeded to bombard me with a daily stream of tearful, manipulative texts, long, rambling, poorly punctuated screeds about how her innocent, angelic children deserved a stable, loving home with a yard to play in, how my selfish, unfeeling actions were tearing this fragile family apart at the very seams, and hitting the classic guilt trip button with a flourish worthy of a soap opera diva, how dear Grandma June would be so deeply, terribly disappointed in my callous, ungrateful, and unloving behavior. It was a masterclass in emotional blackmail and insidious gaslighting, each message more cloying, more manipulative, and more infuriatingly guilt-inducing than the last. Ethan, meanwhile, apparently preferred a more public and therefore more humiliating form of harassment. He accidentally bumped into me at my usual wholesale restaurant supplier one busy morning, making a loud, theatrical, and utterly mortifying scene in front of several other local chefs and business owners about how I was callously letting a perfectly good family home, a precious legacy from our sainted grandmother, go to waste while his poor, innocent, deserving children were practically living on top of each other, cramped into a tiny, unsuitable apartment with no place to play. It was a clear, calculated, and deeply malicious attempt to damage my professional reputation within our small, tight-knit, and often gossipy culinary community, to paint me as unreasonable, uncharitable, cold-hearted, and generally a bad guy to people I did regular and important business with. He wanted to make me a pariah, to isolate me from my professional peers, to turn public opinion in this small town against me until I had no choice, no support system left, but to cave to their outrageous, unending demands. The stress was beginning to take its toll. I was barely sleeping, jumping at every unexpected noise, and the joy I'd initially felt in Grandma's house was being steadily eroded by their relentless campaign. But Grandma June, bless her quiet foresight, her fierce love, and her surprisingly astute, almost cunning understanding of her own family's limitless capacity for greed, it turned out, had been far more prescient, far more prepared for their avarice and their inevitable machinations than I could ever have possibly imagined. That small, seemingly insignificant, sentimental keepsake she'd pressed into my hand all those years ago, during one of my last bittersweet summer visits before my parents had uprooted our lives and moved us all far away from her comforting, steadying presence, that tarnished old silver locket, intricately carved with delicate forget-me-nots. A locket she always wore close to her heart, a silent testament to a love lost long ago, perhaps for my grandfather, held the key, the literal key, to unraveling their entire web of lies. I'd always kept it, of course, tucked away safely in a drawer with my few other mementos, a tangible, precious link to the only source of unconditional love and unwavering acceptance I'd ever truly known in my entire life. Frustrated, angry, and feeling increasingly cornered and besieged after Ethan's humiliating, reputation-damaging stunt at the wholesale supplier, I'd been idly, distractedly fiddling with it that evening, turning it over and over in my fingers, the cool, smooth metal, a small, familiar comfort against my palm. The main clasp, old and worn smooth, from decades of constant use, suddenly, unexpectedly, gave way in a new, previously unnoticed spot, a tiny, almost invisible seam along its intricately engraved edge. It wasn't broken. It had opened, revealing a minuscule, almost perfectly concealed secondary compartment hidden deep within the locket's ornate casing. My breath caught in my throat. Inside, folded into a square, so small, so impossibly tight, it was a miracle it hadn't disintegrated into dust over the intervening years, was a thin, fragile, almost translucent strip of microfilm. Microfilm. It felt like something straight out of an old, black and white Cold War spy movie, not something my sweet, unassuming, lavender and shortbread cookie grandmother would ever possess, let alone hide so cleverly, so secretly. Mr. Peterson, with his decades of old police connections and a network of favors owed that stretched across the state and back, knew a guy, naturally, a retired forensics technician with a well-known penchant for collecting and restoring vintage investigative equipment, who still had a working, albeit ancient and notoriously temperamental, microfilm reader tucked away in his cluttered, dusty garage workshop. What we found on that tiny, unassuming strip of film later that night, hunched over the glowing screen in Miss Peterson's dimly lit study, was nothing short of a bombshell. An explosive, game-changing revelation that turned everything I thought I knew about my family, about their supposed financial struggles, and about Grandma June's final, difficult years, completely, irrevocably on its head. It was a meticulously kept, almost obsessively detailed log in Grandma June's own distinctive, elegant, slightly spidery handwriting, detailing years upon years of so-called financial loans, her pointed, ironic quotation marks, not mine, a silent, heartbreaking testament to her enduring skepticism and weariness, to my parents, David and Susan, and, increasingly and alarmingly in later years, directly to my brother, Ethan. Loans that, according to her precise, dated notes and careful, almost painful accounting, were never, not one single dime, ever repaid. More damningly, the microfilm included clear, legible photocopies of hastily scrawled, often guilt-laden, and legally binding promissory notes they'd all signed, presumably under considerable pressure from her for these substantial sums. And there was a heartbreaking, deeply disturbing series of increasingly desperate, pleading letters from Grandma June, drafts mostly addressed to my parents, begging them, imploring Ethan in particular, in a tone of weary, profound resignation and growing fear, to stop relentlessly pressuring her, harassing her, to invest her meager, hard-earned retirement savings in his latest harebrained, sure-to-fail, get-rich-quick schemes. Schemes she clearly, wisely, and explicitly identified in her private notes as foolish, ill-conceived, dangerously risky, and very likely fraudulent. There were also her private, dated notes detailing specific, often heated, and clearly distressing conversations where they had relentlessly, cruelly tried to convince her, to bully her, to emotionally blackmail her, to cajole her with false, empty promises, into changing her will, into disinheriting me and leaving everything to Ethan, and her firm, unwavering, often angry, and ultimately heartbreakingly brave refusals. And then the absolute, undeniable kicker, the final, irrefutable legal proof that would blow their entire deceitful, greedy scheme sky high. A digitally scanned, crystal clear, and perfectly preserved copy of her original, properly executed, and notarized last will and testament, explicitly, unequivocally leaving the coastal cottage and her modest but significant savings entirely and solely to me, Alex Henderson, her beloved and, as she wrote, only truly deserving grandson. This will was clearly, unambiguously dated just 6 months prior to her death, and accompanying it, like a final, fiercely protective shield she had erected from beyond the grave, was a handwritten addendum, penned in her shaky but unmistakably determined and lucid hand, properly witnessed by both Mr. Peterson and another trusted, lifelong friend, a retired, highly respected, and unimpeachable schoolteacher named Mrs. Albright, as it turned out, a woman known for her integrity, stating unequivocally and in no uncertain legal terms that any subsequent will or codicil produced after that specific date, particularly one naming any other member of the Henderson family as a primary beneficiary of her estate, should be considered null, void, and without any legal standing whatsoever, having almost certainly been obtained under extreme duress, undue influence, or outright malicious deception. She had anticipated their boundless, insatiable greed. She had, in her own quiet, resourceful, and remarkably brave way, tried her very best to protect me, her chosen heir, even from beyond the grave, leaving me the weapons I would need to fight for what was rightfully mine. Armed with this irrefutable, explosive, and emotionally devastating evidence, Sarah Chen drafted a blistering, legally airtight, and frankly, terrifying cease and desist letter addressed directly to the hapless, and I hoped, soon to be disbarred, Mr. Davies, with certified, return receipt requested copies sent directly and very pointedly to my parents and Ethan at their last known addresses. The letter meticulously, chronologically, and with surgical precision outlined their escalating illegal campaign of harassment against me, referenced the damning, undeniable evidence of their long-term financial exploitation and clear emotional abuse of Grandma June, and stated in no uncertain, legally binding terms that any further attempt on their part to enforce the clearly, demonstrably fraudulent addendum to her will, or to interfere in any way, shape, or form with my rightful, legally documented inheritance of the property, would be met with the full, unyielding, and considerable force of the law. This included, Sarah pointedly and repeatedly noted, the immediate pursuit of potential and very serious criminal charges for elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, uttering a forged document, harassment, witness, intimidation, and quite possibly extortion. We also, at Mr. Peterson's astute and strategically sound suggestion, included a subtle yet unmistakable, carefully worded hint that we were now fully aware of Ethan's less than legal business ventures and the decidedly unsavory, potentially dangerous, and criminally inclined characters he might currently be involved with. A well-aimed, powerful shot across their bow, designed to let them know, unequivocally, that we understood the true, desperate, and potentially violent source of their sudden, intense, and obsessive interest in Grandma June's modest estate. The game we were signaling had changed. The reaction from their camp was immediate, but once again, not in the way I had naively, foolishly hoped or even remotely expected. Instead of backing down in the face of such overwhelming, damning, and potentially life-altering evidence, they doubled down, lashing out in a new, even more insidious, more desperate, and, frankly, terrifying way. A few days after Mr. Davies undoubtedly received, and hopefully had the professional sense and legal obligation to be thoroughly alarmed by our comprehensive and threatening letter, I got a call. An official, chilling call from Adult Protective Services. An anonymous, but clearly not so anonymous, and utterly malicious complaint had been filed against me. It alleged, in lurid, slanderous, and entirely fabricated detail, that I, Alex Henderson, had somehow unduly influenced my frail, vulnerable, and easily confused grandmother in her final, declining months. that I had systematically, cruelly isolated her from her loving, devoted, and deeply concerned family. Them, naturally, the paragons of familial virtue. That I had, through unspecified but clearly nefarious means, coerced her into changing her will to benefit myself exclusively, callously cutting out her true, deserving heirs. The complaint even despicably, and with a level of calculated cruelty that took my breath away and made bile rise in my throat, hinted at possible physical neglect on my part during the brief periods I had managed to stay at Grandma's house to help care for her when her health first began to seriously fail. It was a vile, disgusting, and utterly baseless tactic, a scorched earth policy clearly orchestrated by my parents as a desperate, last-ditch public relations effort to discredit me, to tie me up in a bureaucratic, emotionally draining, and reputation-shattering nightmare, and to paint me as the villain of this sordid, tragic family drama. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it left me momentarily stunned, speechless with a rage so profound, so visceral, it felt like it might actually consume me from the inside out. They were trying to weaponize the very system designed to protect the vulnerable, like Grandma June had been in her final days, against me, the true and lifelong victim of their relentless, soul-crushing campaign of manipulation, neglect, and insatiable greed. The battle for Grandma June's little house by the sea, I realized with a grim, hardening resolve that settled deep in my bones like a core of unyielding steel, wasn't just about a piece of property anymore. It was about truth, it was about justice, and it was about finally, definitively, and permanently ending their toxic, destructive, and cancerous reign over my life. And I was, after 10 long years of being their convenient scapegoat, their emotional punching bag, their forgotten son, more than ready to fight. I was ready for war. The call from Adult Protective Services, that despicable, calculated low blow, hit me like a physical punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs and leaving me momentarily breathless with a rage so pure it was almost paralyzing. To have them twist my grief for Grandma June, her final, loving act of leaving me her home, into a vile, public accusation of elder abuse and undue influence, it was a level of depravity, of sheer, unadulterated malice that left me momentarily speechless, reeling from the audacity of their cruelty. But the shock, the initial wave of nauseating disbelief, quickly morphed into a cold, hard, diamond-edged fury. They weren't just trying to steal a house anymore, a physical structure of wood and nails and faded wallpaper. They were actively, maliciously trying to steal my character, my integrity, to obliterate any shred of legitimacy I had, to poison the memory of the one person in my goddamn life who had ever shown me genuine, unconditional, unwavering love. Sarah Chen, my lawyer, was predictably and righteously furious when I relayed the news of the APS complaint, but her anger, unlike mine, was tempered by a steely, pragmatic, and immediate resolve. This is a classic, if particularly loathsome and desperate, smear tactic, Alex, she said, her voice tight with controlled indignation over the phone, a dangerous calm before her own legal storm. They're desperate. They know our evidence regarding Grandma June's true will and their financial exploitation of her is irrefutable, so they're trying to bog you down in a collateral attack, to discredit you as a person, to paint you as the abuser, before any legal proceedings regarding the estate itself can gain significant traction in probate court. It's a transparent, disgusting ploy designed to drain your resources, your emotional energy, and ultimately, your will to fight. She paused, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her sharp legal mind. We need to cooperate fully and transparently with APS, Alex, immediately. We will provide them with every single piece of evidence we have. Grandma June's meticulously kept handwritten log from the microfilm, her properly witnessed original will, and her subsequent legally sound addendum that explicitly nullifies any later documents. Will include Miss Peterson's sworn affidavit regarding her clear state of mind, her fierce independence, and her repeatedly expressed fears about your parents' greed and Ethan's recklessness. We need to demonstrate, unequivocally and beyond any shadow of a doubt, that this is a baseless, retaliatory, and frankly, perjurious complaint, born entirely from their frustrated avarice and nothing more. The Adult Protective Services investigation, as Sarah had predicted, was undeniably stressful and deeply invasive. It involved several long, uncomfortable interviews where I had to recount, in painful detail, my entire dysfunctional family history and my loving, protective relationship with Grandma June. It involved intrusive requests for my financial records, my work schedule, even contact information for friends who could vouch for my character. And it involved the constant gnawing anxiety of having my grief, my integrity, and my entire relationship with my beloved grandmother scrutinized under a harsh, unforgiving microscope of official suspicion. But ultimately, their desperate, malicious gambit worked spectacularly in my favor, backfiring on them with a satisfying thud. Mr. Peterson, with his decades of unimpeachable service as a police detective and his clear, unwavering, and deeply personal affection for Grandma June, was an absolute pillar of credibility. His testimony regarding her sharp, lucid mind, her fierce independence even in her declining physical health, and her explicit, documented fears about my parents' relentless financial importuning and Ethan's increasingly erratic behavior was irrefutable and clearly resonated with the investigator. The evidence on the microfilm, particularly Grandma June's own poignant, dated, handwritten words about the constant, exhausting pressure she was under from my parents to change her will in Ethan's favor, painted a crystal clear, undeniable picture of who the real manipulators, the real abusers, were in this sad, sordid family saga. The APS investigator assigned to my case, a weary but remarkably discerning woman in her late 40s named Miss Albright, who had clearly seen far too much of humanity's darker side in her line of work, quickly and efficiently saw through their transparent, self-serving charade. The case against me was officially closed within a couple of surprisingly short weeks, deemed unfounded and without merit, with a not-so-subtle, stern, and reportedly quite memorable warning issued directly to my parents by Miss Albright herself, cautioning them about the serious legal repercussions, including potential criminal charges, of filing malicious, vexatious, and demonstrably false reports with a state protective agency. It was a small but incredibly significant victory, a validation that cut through some of the suffocating fog of their lies, and it fueled my resolve like high-octane gasoline. They had, in their boundless arrogance and their panic desperation, monumentally, catastrophically overplayed their hand. Meanwhile, Mr. Peterson, his old-school detective instincts now fully engaged and his personal sense of justice thoroughly outraged by my family's despicable tactics, had been quietly, persistently, and with a network of old contacts that still ran surprisingly deep, digging even further into Ethan's much vaunted but consistently vague business ventures and the less than reputable characters Sarah Chen had so pointedly and correctly alluded to in our powerful cease and desist letter. What he eventually unearthed, through a combination of sifting through online forums dedicated to high-risk, unregulated investments, and a few discreet, off-the-record conversations with some of his shadier former informants, was even more disturbing, more dangerous, and frankly, more terrifying than I could have anticipated. Ethan, it turned out, wasn't just a spoiled, incompetent, and perpetually failing brat living off parental handouts and a string of predictably disastrous get-rich-quick schemes. He was, according to Mr. Peterson's increasingly alarming and well-corroborated findings, deeply, inextricably enmeshed in a local, high-risk, and completely unregulated cryptocurrency speculation ring. This particular ring run by individuals with very real, very unsavory, and demonstrably violent criminal ties, including, it was strongly rumored and increasingly evident, the infamous Marcus Thorne himself, or at least some of his more aggressive and ruthless regional lieutenants, had recently spectacularly and very publicly collapsed, leaving a long, angry, and increasingly impatient trail of out-of-pocket investors demanding their money back, with exorbitant interest, and often with explicit, chilling menaces. My father, David, in a desperate, foolhardy, and ultimately pathetic attempt to bail out his precious, irresponsible golden boy yet again, had apparently, and with an astonishing degree of arrogant stupidity, promised these dangerous, unforgiving individuals that a significant family inheritance was forthcoming, an inheritance they could all, he'd foolishly implied, handsomely benefit from if they just helped persuade the stubborn, uncooperative, and now inconveniently present beneficiary, me, to be more forthcoming and generous with the funds. The initial break-in at Grandma June's house, the crudely splintered drawer on her old roll-top desk, they hadn't just been looking for a newer, fraudulent will to legitimize their claim on the property. They'd likely been frantically, desperately searching for any hidden assets, any stashed cash, any marketable antiques, anything at all of value they could use to appease Ethan's increasingly agitated and undoubtedly dangerous creditors. And the thinly veiled threats I'd received from my father weren't just his usual blustering, impotent rage. They were likely amplified, perhaps even directly dictated, by these shadowy, violent figures lurking menacingly in the background, using my parents and my idiot brother Ethan as their desperate, terrified, and ultimately expendable puppets. This wasn't just a grubby, pathetic family dispute over a will anymore, if it ever truly had been. I was caught squarely, unwillingly in the dangerous, unpredictable, and potentially lethal fallout of Ethan's reckless, idiotic, and very possibly illegal dealings. My life, I realized with a sudden, sickening jolt of pure, cold fear that made the hair on my arms stand on end, could actually, genuinely be in danger. Armed with this new, terrifying, and game-changing information, Sarah Chen immediately, and with my full, now thoroughly alarmed agreement, advised a much more aggressive, preemptive legal strategy. We filed an emergency petition in probate court to officially validate Grandma June's original, notarized will and her witnessed, handwritten addendum, seeking an expedited hearing to settle the matter of the inheritance once and for all. Simultaneously, and with a new sense of urgency, we filed for a comprehensive, legally binding, and immediately enforceable restraining order against my parents, David and Susan Henderson, my brother, Ethan Henderson, and his equally complicit wife, Brittany Henderson, citing their well-documented pattern of ongoing harassment, the initial attempted break-in at Grandma's house, their malicious and now officially dismissed smear campaign with Adult Protective Services, and, most critically, the clear and present and potentially lethal danger posed to my physical safety by Ethan's documented criminal associations and the escalating threats clearly emanating from that dangerous quarter. The court date was set for the following week, an unusually swift scheduling that Sarah attributed to the seriousness of the allegations involving organized crime and the judge's apparent desire to nip this escalating situation in the bud. My family, predictably, and no doubt with funds they didn't actually possess or had borrowed from even shadier sources, hired the same smarmy, overconfident Mr. Davies to represent them. His first desperate move was to file a rambling, incoherent counterpetition, a document riddled with blatant falsehoods, wild accusations, and outrageous, easily disproven claims. asserting that their updated addendum, the one they tried to bully and deceive Grandma June into signing on her deathbed, was the true and sole reflection of her final wishes, and that I, Alex Henderson, was the one exhibiting erratic, greedy, dangerously unstable, and mentally unhinged behavior, possibly even posing a danger to myself and others if not brought under familial control. It was, Sarah assured me with a grim smile, the legal equivalent of a Hail Mary pass thrown by a team already down by 50 points in the final seconds of the game. But it still meant it was going to be a nasty, brutal, and very public fight. And I knew, with a weary certainty born of long experience, that they would stop at absolutely nothing to try and get what they wanted. The days leading up to the pivotal court hearing were a suffocating blur of intense legal preparations with Sarah, sleepless nights filled with a gnawing, persistent anxiety that no amount of chamomile tea or late-night meditation apps could dispel, and a constant, prickling, low-level fear that made every unexpected noise outside my rented room, every unfamiliar car that lingered too long on the street, feel like a potential, imminent threat. Ava, my friend from LA, who had originally recommended Sarah, bless her fiercely loyal, take-no-shit heart, flew up from LA. Without a second thought, as soon as I told her the court date, a much-needed, grounding pillar of sarcastic, unwavering, and occasionally wonderfully profane support. Miss Peterson, stoic, steadfast, and utterly reliable, helped us coordinate with the local police department, ensuring there was an official, documented record of the threats and the potential danger I was facing, even going so far as to arrange for a discreet but visible police presence near my temporary lodgings and the courthouse itself on the day of the hearing. Chloe, my sister, remained a frustrating, worrying ghost. After her tearful, desperate confession in the park about Thorn in the Ledger, she'd vanished again, her burner phone disconnected, no forwarding address, no way to reach her. I didn't know if she was terrified into silence by our parents or Thorn's people, if she'd been strong-armed or manipulated back into the toxic family fold, or worse, if she was now actively, perhaps even willingly, working against me again under duress or false promises. The uncertainty about her true allegiance, her ultimate loyalties, gnawed at me almost as much as the direct threats from my parents and Ethan's shadowy creditors. The courtroom on the day of the hearing was small, stuffy, overcrowded, and packed with a palpable, suffocating tension, so thick you could practically chew on it and taste the fear. My parents sat ramrod straight, almost vibrating with suppressed rage, at the opposing table with a visibly sweating Ethan and a sneering, contemptuous Brittany, all four of them attempting and failing miserably to project an aura of aggrieved, sorrowful, and unjustly accused innocence. Davies, their lawyer, was all smooth, reptilian confidence and oily, insincere, patronizing charm, at least until Sarah Chen began to speak. The hearing began with Davies presenting their flimsy, easily dismantled case, or rather their carefully constructed, demonstrably false fiction. He painted a ludicrous, almost laughable picture of Grandma June as a confused, easily manipulated, and mentally failing elderly woman in her final declining days, tragically swayed by her scheming, opportunistic, and financially desperate grandson, me, naturally the villain of their piece, and how my parents and Ethan, her truly devoted, selfless, and heartbroken family, were merely altruistically, and with great personal sacrifice, trying to uphold her true, deeply considered, final wishes as supposedly expressed in their newly discovered, entirely legitimate and legally sound addendum. He even had the unmitigated, shameless audacity to suggest, without a shred of evidence, that my modest food truck business was failing miserably, and that I was a desperate, cynical gold digger, callously trying to leech off my sainted, departed grandmother's hard-earned estate. When it was Sarah Chen's turn to address the court, she was an absolute force of nature, a legal warrior in a perfectly tailored suit. Calmly, methodically, with the precision of a master surgeon dissecting a diseased organ, she dismantled their entire rotten narrative, piece by damning, irrefutable piece. She presented Grandma June's meticulously kept microfilm log, her increasingly desperate, pleading, handwritten letters, the properly notarized ironclad original will, and the witnessed, legally sound, handwritten addendum that explicitly, unequivocally voided any subsequent changes made under suspicious or coercive circumstances. She then called Mr. Peterson to the stand, his heartfelt, credible, and deeply moving testimony about June's consistently sharp mind, her unwavering, fierce, and often expressed love for me, and her explicit, documented fears about my parents' relentless financial greed and Ethan's reckless irresponsibility visibly moved the no-nonsense, experienced judge. Then, Sarah, with a dramatic flair that would have made a Broadway director proud, dropped the bombshell. She introduced the carefully corroborated evidence of Ethan's deep, undeniable involvement in the recently collapsed, illicit cryptocurrency speculation ring, complete with names, dates, transaction records, and the dangerous, criminally connected individuals he now owed vast, unpayable sums of money to. She powerfully, persuasively, and chillingly suggested that their family's sudden, desperate, and patently illegal attempts to get their hands on Grandma June's modest house were not, as they claimed, about fulfilling some fabricated family need or honoring some deathbed wish, but were in fact entirely about staving off violent, potentially lethal retribution from Ethan's furious and undoubtedly dangerous creditors. My father blanched, his face turning a pasty, unhealthy, almost translucent gray. Ethan looked like he was about to physically throw up all over Mr. Davies' expensive, polished Italian shoes. Brittany's perfectly applied, mask-like makeup couldn't hide the brief, ugly, involuntary sneer of pure, unadulterated panic that twisted her usually smug features. Davies tried to object, to bluster, to discredit Sarah's evidence as hearsay and unsubstantiated rumor, but Sarah was relentless, a shark that had scented blood and was now closing in for the kill. She coolly, calmly presented further, irrefutable evidence of their systematic, malicious harassment campaign against me. The official, dismissive report from Adult Protective Services regarding their unfounded, vindictive complaint, even printouts of some of Brittany's more venomous, thinly veiled, and easily traceable social media posts. The judge, a stern, highly respected, and experienced woman in her late 50s, with eyes that had clearly seen every conceivable form of human depravity and deceit in her years on the bench, listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim, concerned, and visibly disapproving as the sordid, ugly, and frankly pathetic details of my family's decades of toxic behavior unfolded before her in excruciating, undeniable detail. The turning point, the moment that definitively sealed their fate and shattered any lingering hope they might have clung to, however, came from a completely unexpected, and for me, deeply emotional source. During a brief mid-morning recess, as I was trying to steel myself for the inevitable, brutal, and undoubtedly personal cross-examination by the increasingly desperate Mr. Davies, a court bailiff approached Sarah Chen. "Counselor," he said quietly, his voice neutral, "there's someone here in the witness waiting room who wishes to speak with you urgently regarding the Henderson case. She says her name is Chloe Carter. Henderson, I mean. She claims to be the petitioner's sister." My heart leaped into my throat, then seemed to stop altogether for a terrifying, breathless moment. Chloe, she was here. After all this deafening silence, all this agonizing uncertainty, Ava, sitting beside me, her hand, a comforting, steadying presence on my arm, squeezed it so hard I nearly yelped, her eyes wide with a mixture of profound shock and dawning, incredulous hope. Sarah, ever the consummate, unflappable professional, simply nodded once to the bailiff and excused herself, disappearing into the bustling corridor with him, leaving me in a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. When the hearing reconvened precisely 15 minutes later, Sarah Chen, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips, informed the judge that the petitioner had a new, unannounced, but highly relevant witness. Chloe walked slowly, hesitantly, almost timidly, to the stand, pale and visibly trembling, her eyes fixed on the worn wooden floor, deliberately, pointedly avoiding the furious, incredulous, and suddenly, unmistakably terrified stares of our parents and Ethan. Her testimony, when it finally came, was quiet, almost whispered at first, each word seeming to cause her physical pain, but it was absolutely, utterly devastating to their case. She corroborated everything on the microfilm, every damning detail of Grandma June's meticulously kept log. She admitted, her voice choked with raw, ragged tears, that our parents had systematically, relentlessly pressured Grandma June for money for years, that Ethan's endless, foolish ventures were a constant, crippling drain on their finances, and that she herself, since she was a child, had been used as a reluctant, often unwilling, and deeply conflicted pawn in their manipulative, greedy schemes. She confessed, her voice breaking with a sorrow so profound it echoed through the stunned silence of the courtroom, that the updated addendum, their lawyer, Mr. Davies, was so vehemently, desperately pushing as legitimate was an utter, despicable fraud, a complete and total fabrication. She described, in horrifying, sickening detail, how she had personally witnessed our father David, callously, repeatedly coaching our mother Susan on how to mimic Grandma June's increasingly shaky, frail signature, and how they had then pressured a new, ethically dubious, and easily intimidated notary, who, it turned out, was a distant, financially struggling cousin of Brittany's, in quote, to validate the fraudulent document after Grandma June was already too ill, too heavily medicated, and too mentally clouded to fully comprehend what she was supposedly signing, if she had even been conscious enough to sign it herself at all, a detail Chloe tearfully admitted she wasn't even sure about. She then, her voice gaining a desperate strength, detailed the terrifying, ongoing threats from Marcus Thorne's brutal associates, the true, violent nature of her own skating accident that had been no accident at all, but a brutal, calculated warning, and how our parents and Ethan had explicitly, repeatedly, and with cold-blooded deliberation, told her to lie to me, to manipulate me, to do whatever it took, say whatever it took, to get me to give them the house or the money from its inevitable sale to appease the insatiable Marcus Thorne and save their own worthless, miserable skins. She wept openly, unashamedly, as she spoke, not the calculated, theatrical crocodile tears of her previous manipulative performances, but the genuine, heartbreaking, soul-wrenching sobs of someone finally, agonizingly, and with immense personal courage, unburdening themselves of an unbearable, crushing, and soul-destroying weight of guilt, fear, and long-suppressed truth. The courtroom was stunned into an absolute, pin-drop, almost reverent silence. My parents and Ethan looked as if they'd been physically poleaxed, their faces grotesque, masks of disbelief, dawning horror, and abject, cornered terror. Brittany was staring at Chloe, her former sister-in-law and supposed friend, with a look of pure, unadulterated, murderous hatred. Davies, their once smug, condescending lawyer, was frantically, uselessly shuffling his now worthless papers, his smooth, confident facade completely, irrevocably shattered, his face ashen and beaded with sweat. The judge's ruling, when it came after a commendably brief deliberation, was swift, brutal, and utterly decisive. She declared Grandma June's original, properly executed will, the one leaving her house and modest savings entirely and solely to me, Alex Henderson, as the one and only valid and legally binding document. The Henderson family's so-called updated addendum was summarily, contemptuously thrown out, officially and permanently declared fraudulent. She then granted my request for a permanent, comprehensive, and immediately enforceable restraining order against David, Susan, Ethan, and Brittany Henderson, citing a clear, undeniable, and deeply disturbing pattern of harassment, intimidation, and potential, if not actual, endangerment. Furthermore, and this was the blow that truly, finally broke them, she formally, and with visible judicial disgust, referred the voluminous, damning evidence of potential elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, the uttering of a forged document, and Ethan's deeply concerning, well-documented connections to illegal financial schemes and known organized crime figures to the District Attorney's Office for immediate, comprehensive criminal investigation. As we left the courthouse a short time later, blinking in the sudden, bright, almost painfully cleansing Oregon sunlight, I felt a profound, almost physical weight, when I hadn't even fully realized I'd been carrying like a crushing burden for most of my goddamn life, lift from my shoulders. It wasn't just about the house anymore, not really. It was about the truth, the ugly, messy, painful, but ultimately liberating truth, finally, blessedly, and very publicly coming to light. My parents and Ethan were immediately hemmed in, almost mobbed at the courthouse lobby by a surprisingly aggressive, well-informed scrum of local newspaper and television reporters, a development. Mr. Peterson, with a discreet, almost perceptible smile, later admitted to having quietly, strategically tipped off. Their faces, caught in the harsh, unforgiving glare of flashing cameras and thrusting microphones, were a grotesque, almost comical mixture of profound shock, utter humiliation, and dawning, abject horror as pointed, accusatory, and deeply uncomfortable questions were shouted at them from all sides. Brittany, ever the consummate, shameless performer, immediately burst into a fresh torrent of loud, theatrical, and entirely unconvincing tears, hysterically claiming she was the innocent, unsuspecting victim in all of this sordid, unfortunate mess. Chloe stood apart from them near the exit, looking small, fragile, and utterly exhausted, but also, for the very first time since I'd known her as an adult, a little bit tentatively, blessedly free. I walked over to her. There were no easy words, no simple, comforting platitudes that could bridge the vast, desolate, war-torn chasm of years and lies and betrayals that stretched between us. Thank you, I said simply, the two words feeling woefully inadequate but deeply, profoundly sincere. She nodded, fresh tears, quieter this time, still streaming down her pale, tired face, but these felt different somehow, cleansed of the old manipulations, the old fears. "I'm so sorry, Alex," she whispered, her voice raspy, broken. "For everything, for all of it. I should have done this years ago. I should have been stronger. For you. For Grandma." "You did it now, Chloe," I said, and I truly, deeply meant it. That's what matters. Our relationship, if we were ever to truly, authentically have one, would be a long, arduous, and incredibly complicated road, undoubtedly filled with treacherous landmines of past hurts and lingering, bitter betrayals. But for the very first time, there was a flicker, a tiny, hesitant, almost imperceptible spark of something that wasn't built on a foundation of lies, deceit, and corrosive manipulation. There was at least a chance. Ava threw a supportive, exuberant arm around my shoulders, her usual sarcastic grin softened by a genuine, fierce warmth that brought an unexpected lump to my own throat. "Well, Chef Alex," she said, her voice filled with a vibrant, infectious pride that made my own eyes sting a little. "Looks like you got your house, and a hell of a lot more besides. Justice, truth, and a sister who finally found her goddamn spine. Not bad for a week's work. Now, what do you say we go find the best damn Dungeness crab in this entire godforsaken drama-filled town? My treat. You've more than earned it, my friend. You've earned it all." As we walked away, leaving the Henderson family to finally, deservedly, and very publicly face the cacophonous, damning music of their own destructive, selfish making, I felt a quiet, profound, and deeply unfamiliar sense of peace. A peace I hadn't felt in years, if ever, settle over me like a warm, comforting blanket. Grandma June's legacy, I finally truly understood, wasn't just a little paint-peeled house by the vast, restless sea. It was the enduring, unshakable strength to fight for what was right, the unwavering courage to face down bullies and manipulators, no matter who they were or what power they thought they held, and the hard-won, forged-in-fire resilience to build a life, and perhaps, eventually, with time and healing, a true, chosen family, entirely on my own terms. The discordant, threatening notes of the past were finally, blessedly fading, replaced by the tentative, hopeful, and surprisingly beautifully resonant strains of a new and much more honest, much more authentic rhapsody